Initiation is a very complicated process, but what it really is man's recovery of his divine nature. If man has the image and likeness of God, where he is now is the likeness. The likeness is the low empirical subject with all his worldly will and desire that's mimetically inherited, that is infected with the ideas that came before him, all this psychotechnology that has made him the current sending of being that he is, which is annihilated modern nihilism, right? That history that Nietzsche talks about, and Nietzsche's right about all that, trying to escape that history is correct. That's what initiation does. It escapes the intellect by a slow and steady collaboration and healing that really you're moving from the likeness to the image, to the God image in man. Initiation has 3 stages: purification, illumination, and union, being union with God or perfection. It's nothing more than what the saints go through and what the monastics go through, even though they don't call it that. The synthesis of spirit and intellect, which is the intuition that leads us out of the stale, dead intellect that we are. To do that, you first have to purify yourself. Well, there are actually 4 steps. One is the preparation, which for Western man is very difficult. He has to actually deprogram that modernism, the scientism of dead being, even of Nietzscheanism and metaphysics, because he is metaphysics. He was the most metaphysically developed or descended, let's say, or fallen metaphysically of people, to the degree that he no longer has the unconscious faculties, or the faculties that have now been rendered unconscious, and his contact with the divine. One of the biggest ones is his obsession as a piece of technology, which your mind is, having separated itself from spirit. One of the largest things is to not be obsessed with ends, is to just be with the thing. And the Central European is actually better at that than the Western European. The European needs to get used to just doing the practice for the practice's sake and beyond, rather than setting up a procedure in which you already know what is to come in advance, which means you've mastered it. But you can't master the divine, can you? You're not allowed to master the divine. That's why the Western has trouble with this. That step of purification, the thing that's involved, let's just put it this way, is that it involves the 3 O's: chastity, poverty, and obedience. One is obedience to what? Solar law, as it has come down in Revelation. That's also linked up with chastity. You're being directed what you shouldn't be involved with. Chastity is about keeping yourself away from all the act or the image or the hearing of things that aren't in alignment with solar law. Poverty is sort of wrapped up with chastity as well. And the way of doing poverty is concentration without effort, which we've described in previous videos. What would be called monastic silence, the withdrawal, but using concentration without effort, which is a synthesis of conscious and unconscious, which settles the mind's substance until eventually it becomes like a reflective water surface, where you empty yourself so you can receive revelation from above, so you can be healed from above. So this process isn't just a practice. It begins that way as a cognitive process, which is like a mechanical process because we made ourselves into the mechanism. It evolves from that into a growth process of like a tree. And then from there into a moral process, which means you're dealing with something on the other side. You're dealing with entities and beings. The way you even logic, you move from a formal logic, which is like a mechanical logic, into a moral logic for explaining, like a personal logic, but more a divine logic for explaining the relationship between things, father and son and such, which brings it all to life as a mystical fact. It starts as a practice and as the individual, but it evolves into a collaboration with someone on the other side, like the other cup or the other I, the transcended I, which is outside time, which is eternal. But the key thing that is done is that concentration without effort. It's both meditation and prayer, prayer and meditation. Meditation is nothing more than thinking in the presence of God in the final analysis. Prayer is speaking in the presence of God. Contemplation, and these are the three things that you do. Contemplation is union with God, where all the faculties of soul, of will, of feeling and thought are silenced, right? Which is they call the gift of black perfection. These are all the things the Hermeticist has. You see this in the Arcana, in the meditations on the Tarot. The Hermit, he has his black cape, which is the gift of black perfection. He has truth at a deeper level of his being because God is with him. The Spirit's close to him. That's also what initiation is. The manifesting of YHVH, of 1, 2, 3, 4. The manifesting of divine authority with the human, for one, meaning you're the meeting of the eternal and the temporal, and the person that has initiated the way his world presences to him, he's almost aware of the future before it happens, because divine instinct is with him at a deeper level of being. He's no longer arbitrary. To the degree to which you initiate, you stop being a sinner or sinful and arbitrary in your behavior, and you dissolve your demons, really, or your tendencies. That's sort of what's going on too. You could describe the purification using concentration without effort and prayer, which is prayer, like I said, thinking in the presence of God. You could consider that in initiation to be settling or bringing up or digging down to the bottom of all your tendencies, which send the thoughts, which send the temptations, right? By clearing that, or clearing the image or the arbitrariness, moving towards the likeness and moving towards the image, the perfection or man's perfect qualities, those tendencies are all dissolved. And I can tell you this from direct experience. All your resentments, all your sinful lusts, slowly, little by little, lose their luster and then become non-existent. So, there's people that I've dealt with, you have resentments of certain things, that people have done nasty things, and you leave the mimetic circle of that, is that you no longer care about it. It's been dissolved. You've been freed of it. You've been healed of it in collaboration with outside, in collaboration with Christ. So all those things, those hates, those loves, the sinful ones, have all been transvaluated to soul law instead. So you become like Christ. It's the same thing that exactly. Well, it's a bit different, but you are doing basically the same thing that a monk is doing. And during this process, of course, one needs to be praying and really you're generating. When I say moving from an organic process, or a mechanical to an organic to a personal, but to a divine and moral process, it's a developing of a sympathetic relationship with the transcendent self, with Christ, with the Mother, with St. Michael, and these beings that are really there. And it's the language, the language of moral logic that the Spirit does not ignore. And so what is the phenomenology of this initiation, which we're only generally describing because it's much more complicated than this? Well, it's mystic experience, it's Gnostic experience, imagination and inspiration. It's miraculous experience. Because what you're doing by emptying yourself, like I said, like emptying yourself like a cup, you're preparing yourself through poverty and chastity and solar law to be a receptacle to receive revelation and communication from outside. So the further you go down this path, the more sensitive you become to the signal from outside, from noticing the miraculous in day-to-day, but also the miraculous occurring, even in small ways, through birds or whatever it might be, in facticity and in factical being. This increases through this process because the Lord communicates in many different ways. But birds are one in particular that he does do that. But you essentially become a coincidence intensifier. Again, it's not a cognitive fallacy or anything like that. It's well above what you're used to. And you're not just noticing it because you're looking for it, because it's now relevant. No. It's well above chance. Well above chance. Though the Lord does try to communicate with people and they just don't see it. That's true as well. But going through this process by making yourself a receptacle, you open yourself to inspiration, intuition, Bergsonian intuition, which is a mystic touch, right? So let's just go through those things. What is mystic is you develop the sense of spiritual touch. Touch is used because what that is phenomenologically, and this is all from direct experience, I'm telling you. It's like you have a second sensory organ for all your bodily senses, if that makes sense. So you can feel everything like your body, but in all the same areas, you have another layer which can sense a type of movement from outside, from the black, right? Which is intuition, which is Bergsonian intuition in a small way. You also get a sense, a moral sense, where you can sense the communication through emotiveness, which is love. And so that's part of spiritual touch or intuition. Are those two things? It's a movement, and the reason why they call it spiritual touch is because it's movement. It's both a movement of being moved in terms of a love from something that's not you. You can sense a love from something that's outside you that you have the certainty is not you. And so that's the deepest level of it. And the next is the Gnostic, where it's imagistically you can see it, which is comparable to what Jung describes as active imagination. You see this in your concentration without effort, in your meditations. You can also see it when you're going to sleep, when your eyes are closed, right? The very beginnings of active imagination, you might see it as a static when you look at a wall or when you close your eyes. That is the liminal space that I call active unconscious, really the liminal space between conscious and unconscious. That's where this symbolic stuff appears of active imagination, which isn't imagination. Imagination makes it sound like fancy. No, it's Plotinus talks about this when he says that when the mind has no picture of outside objects, it allows itself the picture of intellectual objects, which again, Rudolf Steiner talks about, where you get an image of things. You can do that. And that's developing inspiration, really. But that's where you get inspiration. You'll see it visually. The mind has a reflective picture that will show symbolic objects, if that makes sense. That's not the visual elements of the world. And I speak of direct experience of this. It's the imagistic. It's another quality. It's another sense that you have access to. And I think most people have access to this. It's just about developing it. That can render color an image. But that is where inspirations show themselves on this, like it's as if it's reflective water. It's the reflective principle that the yod, it's the hay of the yod. The yod speaking in the hay needs a reflective principle. You have access to that reflective principle, and you are shown images. You're shown images in that, whether they're symbolic, even throughout the day. You can get images in that active imagination, which is the liminal space between unconscious. It's how the unconscious communicates to you, imagistically or symbolically, with color, and it's activated through your meditations. This sense, that's the Gnostic sense. It reflects what is shown mystically, and these things can be all experienced at once too. You develop the ability to do all that at once. In initiation, the next sense is the magical sense. So, what actually happens in the world. What you pray for coming true, magical coincidences that occur as communications in the world. That's the magical sense. But also healings that happen. But you get intuitions. Again, that movement happens a lot, leading you away from things. The further you do initiation, the more you develop your divine instinct, where the instinct comes from the divine. It's not one of your inclinations that were arbitrary, because you're no longer arbitrary, so they come from outside. So you get pulled in this or that direction, away from danger. And so as you go on, the further you go on, the greater these things are happening, pulling you away from danger, leading you towards the good and away from evil. And eventually it leads to illumination. Once you finish that purification, YHVH is manifesting with you. I mean, in the stage that I am, it pretty much is the case that it is. You feel in very close union to God. Every morning, you're getting very clear communications, and experiencing all this phenomenology that I just mentioned of mystic sense, Gnostic sense, magic sense, and Hermetic philosophical sense, where it's a synthesis of all those different things together that gives you a metaphysical understanding of it all. But after purification, you enter a stage where you can really ask direct questions that are of which the Hermeticists, Christian Hermeticists, call the Gnostic arcana, or the Gnostic psychoturgical operation, they call it, where you ask a question that is relevant for all the different realms, but whether the mineral, the animal, and the plant, that is relevant for all those things in terms of the future and the past. A question of gravity, of the horizontal, vertical, and below. But what's really happening here is you're awakening. You're both remembering, because the divine is both after the end and before the beginning. It's the future and the past, the eternal. To the degree to which you're no longer arbitrary in terms of just personal delusion, the unconscious gives you access to the whole world, and underneath that, the eternal, in terms of it really is giving it's like the master and his emissary. You thought you were the master as the ego. What you should always have been is the emissary, and it moves the center of consciousness to the eternal, to the rhythmic system. It moves the impetus. You become obedient to him. Once it's the Christ child. Once he has joined you, Lord, I am not worthy for you to be here in my house. It's once he has joined you and he has awoken as a living force and being in you and with you, you cede the ground to him and become obedient to him. And you recognize that every day that he's there. And that becomes more and more certain, intrinsically certain, meaning it's the very experience of going through concentration without effort. Every time that's what's happening. You're growing towards the divine, towards your image, but also in collaboration with him. You're giving effort, and grace has been given to you, and you actually even collaborate in practice itself, like I've mentioned in previous videos, in terms of the movement of your body, the movement of your breath, that is controlled by outside, not like some Wim Hof sorcery breathing, but the master, the Lord, moves your breath, and that's part of the healing, and you're slowly growing towards the divine in that way, slowly getting rid of your arbitrary will to power, which is just mimetic and of the past and the eternal return of the same. And more daily, every day, things are awakening. Life's awakening. Manna is awakening in terms of the meaning has returned, because you can see imagistically all these senses that are being developed in you, and you feel the Lord's presence directly in these different faculties that were unconscious previously, that have been woken up. And as Plato said, you begin remembering what you used to be before the fall. You regain your clairvoyance that you had before the fall, basically, of the transcendent self, which is what conscience is. And so you're developing your conscience, and the more you develop your conscience, and your conscience in the final analysis is your guardian angel, which is your transcendent self, an I, which you don't have any contact with. When you're doing your judgments are a comparison to your heredity and your inclinations and your historical inclinations. That's what you're going with in your judgment. When you when you begin to develop this, your judgment goes outside, because you've cleansed yourself. You have access to the transcendent self. Not that you don't get ideas sometimes from the transcendent self. That happens a lot with other people. You just don't know it's from that. And you might get warnings and not heed them, but most of the time you're just arbitrary. But to the degree to which you develop this, that's the judgment faculty you're working with. Anyway, it's the collaboration with the unconscious. And so through breathing, through concentration without effort, by going because I've talked about before, the passive and the active. The passive is the unconscious, right? The active is the conscious. By doing both at the same time, by collaborating with an outside agent, it awakes, and it's the intertwining of intellect and spirit, of unconscious and conscious, through sympathy, as Bergson talks about. You identify with your guardian angel with enough attention and enough time and enough sympathy, and he becomes you and you become him, and that's the eternal manifesting in facticity with you. And that is, in essence, initiation from a mechanical process of dead modernism into the merging of spirit and intellect, the healing of intellect. When you look at the woke Olympics, those people don't really know, but the values they've identified with, they don't really know what they're doing, but you see the symbolism emerge out of what they're doing, and it's so connected with Delville-Rick symbolism. They don't really know what they're doing, but they've identified with these values, and then those values then have dominated their lives. And because what are those values? Values are entities. That's what they are. At least the highest values. They always have been. It's the weak human logos that identified them as, just like you would identify a proposition, which is not what they are at all. You might think you've mastered the unconscious, but it's moving you, and the spirit is moving you around like a plaything, and you think you can't see it at all, but it's dominating you. And that's why you can't not eat a cheeseburger. That's why you can't control yourself and stop jerking off. That's all these different things are because you're connected to a wider web and you're a provoked being. And what this is reestablishing your freedom from that cybernetic human organism which has you at its whims and the demons that are actually operating in you. This is turning you into Homo Logos, as in divine Logos, and separating you from the world. And once it's complete, Ahriman or Satan can't tempt you anymore in those ways. The only temptation for an initiate, once he's past purification, is that of inflation, which is a subject for another time. But that's initiation. It's the finding the peace of the heart, and no longer can you be homo provoked after that. And that's what we want to do, bring the peace of the heart back to temporality, and that's the gift of the Lord. God bless.